For 30 years, Sarah Whitmore and her husband Robert built a life together out of pure sweat equity. Starting with a one-bedroom apartment, they poured everything they had into opening Whitmore's Diner, a community staple where they worked side by side, counting the daily earnings every single night. When Robert was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer, Sarah devoted herself entirely to his care. She sat through every chemotherapy session and stayed by his hospital bed, holding his hand through the darkest, most painful nights of his life. But just 5 days after burying her husband, an envelope arrived from an attorney she had never met. Sarah and her children were called into a cold conference room to hear the reading of a brand new will, one that Robert had quietly signed a mere 3 weeks before his death. The terms were devastating. The house, the life savings, and the diner she built with her own 2 hands were entirely signed over to Jessica Coleman, a 34-year-old woman who had been having an affair with Robert for 4 years. Sarah was left with absolutely nothing. This exposes a terrifying reality within the legal system. 3 decades of verifiable labor, shared accounts, and a marital partnership can be entirely erased in an instant, overridden by a single signature on a piece of paper. Naming the mistress as the sole beneficiary gave her immediate legal control over the estate's liquid assets. This effectively locked the grieving family out of their own livelihood while the case moved through probate court. But Sarah's daughter Emily worked as a paralegal. She recognized that surviving this required an immediate pivot in strategy. They had to stop looking at this through the lens of emotional betrayal and start treating it as a forensic legal investigation. This diagram illustrates the specific legal framework Emily used to fight back, a concept called undue influence. It happens when a bad faith actor in a position of power manipulates a vulnerable, often dying person. The person's true intent is intercepted and diverted by coercion, resulting in a fraudulent legal document. The family hired an estate litigation attorney and immediately secured an emergency injunction to freeze the assets. Their strategy was to build an undeniable case through the slow, quiet accumulation of hard facts, constructed across 3 specific legal pillars. They knew they couldn't walk into a courtroom and argue about broken vows or fairness. To win, they had to ignore the affair entirely and focus exclusively on proving that the creation of the document itself was a corrupt process. The first pillar of their case focused on the sudden departure from established plans. 3 months before his death, Robert had actually called his longtime family attorney to ask about changing his will. That attorney warned him that sudden, drastic estate changes near the end of a person's life invite heavy court scrutiny. Following that conversation, Robert never called his family lawyer back. Instead, he completely abandoned a 15-year legal precedent and secretly hired a lawyer with absolutely no connection to his estate, a man named Gregory Hale. This map shows the geographic red flag that formed the second pillar of the case. When the family investigated Gregory Hale, they found that his law office was located only 4 blocks away from the mistress's apartment building. Looking at his official record reveals an even bigger issue. Hale's law license had been placed under review twice in the past 8 years. The state bar had specifically flagged him for questionable capacity assessments, meaning he had a documented history of drafting wills for people who lacked the mental state to understand the documents. Meanwhile, Jessica's own actions provided sworn evidence of her intent. She walked right into Whitmore's Diner during a Sunday rush, publicly telling Sarah to start saying goodbye to the business, a confrontation witnessed by multiple longtime customers who provided sworn statements to the family's lawyer. But shady pasts and close proximity are circumstantial. To legally invalidate the signature, the family needed objective proof that Robert lacked the cognitive capacity to understand the new will. That brings us to the third and most critical pillar, the medical timeline. The family needed to forensically reconstruct exactly what was happening to Robert's cognitive state on the specific day the new will was signed. This timeline tracks the events of March 4th. By subpoenaing the hospital visitor logs, the legal team found exactly when Gregory Hale arrived. He was in Robert's room for a brief window of exactly 22 minutes, occurring specifically while Sarah had stepped out to get coffee. A hospice nurse caring for Robert had kept a private log of his treatment. Her notes showed that due to an overnight spike in pain, Robert received a significantly higher dose of pain medication exactly 90 minutes before the lawyer arrived. Notice how the documented effects of that dosage map onto the day. The nurse's notes listed Robert as disoriented and slow to respond to basic questions, a state that completely encapsulates the 22-minute signing window, legally shattering the claim that Robert was of sound mind. This unalterable medical timeline proved what the family suspected all along. The signature on that document was not an act of personal agency. It was the direct result of targeted manipulation against a vulnerable man. 8 months after Robert passed away, the case finally reached a pretrial hearing. The judge meticulously reviewed the impaired medical state, the suspicious relationship between the new attorney and the beneficiary, and the sudden abandonment of a 15-year estate plan. The ruling was decisive. Based on clear and convincing evidence of undue influence, the March 4th will was entirely invalidated. The court fully reinstated Robert's original estate plan, returning the assets to Sarah and her children. The fallout for the perpetrators was permanent. Jessica Coleman fled the state to escape the local backlash, and the following spring, Gregory Hale was formally stripped of his law license after the state bar reviewed the court's findings. As regional television stations began broadcasting the details of the deathbed will, the private legal battle became a public cause. This entire battle demonstrates the primary function of estate law. Legal mechanisms like undue influence exist specifically to act as a shield, protecting vulnerable people from opportunistic, bad faith actors when they are at their weakest. A signature on a legal document can be coerced in 22 minutes in a quiet hospital room, but a genuine legacy leaves an evidentiary trail of deep community ties and decades of sweat equity, and that is something fraud can never erase.